Hi, are you going to hang out with me? That's going to be nice. We'll see how this goes. So, I was listening to a video this morning about the conflict in the Middle East. And this is something I hear often, this idea that how ironic that Israeli people are committing genocide. Like, how ironic that the people who endured such a horrific experience earlier in the 20th century are now perpetrating, now about a little under 100 years later. Well, one could argue with the timeline about how long this genocide has been going on, but in the context of the most recent flare up, how is it that a group of people who are so intimately connected to a genocide in their recent history can so easily be blinded to what their actions are to another group of people. So I don't find it ironic at all. In fact, this is trauma. This is traumatized people gonna traumatize, right? Like, hurt people are gonna hurt people. We know this. This is not a surprise by any means. This is exactly how things have worked in human history for forever, perhaps. I don't really, again, I don't want to get too much into timelines here, but yeah, it's not surprising at all that a group of people who experienced the ancestors of people who experienced horrors and were lucky to even get out alive are now continuing to perpetuate horrors, are continuing to perpetuate trauma. That's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. The trauma hasn't been resolved. It hasn't been processed. And that's what happens with unresolved trauma. We project it and we put it out on someone else. So, yeah, this is our story. This is the human condition up until this point. The good news is that that's not happening so much anymore. And we're seeing it already. We've seen it in this conflict. We're seeing Jewish people stand up and say, "Not in my name. Nuh-uh. No. We're not doing this. This is not right." These are people, for whatever reason, aren't as traumatized and are able to separate their identity of Jewishness away from this idea of just, I'm a human and from at the human level, I don't want to see this happening. This feels wrong to me and I don't want to be a part of it. So we're seeing it in this, but we're seeing it all over. We're seeing it in how we talk to one another, in how we deal with family of origin trauma, and there's a whole new generation of people coming up and saying, I don't want to do what happened to me, the way that I was treated as a child. I don't want my kids to have that. It stops with me, which is really exciting to see. It's really, again, this is why I'm so excited about the future of humanity and the future of the world. Like, we are living in amazing times, and this is, to me, the thing that makes it amazing. This is the time where human consciousness has gotten to a level now, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to be crapping on not crapping on our ancestors. When you look back, I feel like like with intergenerational trauma, epigenetics, it's very clear to see this pattern of trauma being passed through the generations. If there's a fear that your mother had or your father had, chances are pretty good that they will embed that fear into you. And despite that, human consciousness is still growing. You'd think it's weird that it's actually not progressing backwards, but despite all this compounded trauma that's just getting passed from one generation to another, there's still, maybe because it's so heavy now, I don't know. This would be an interesting discussion to have with someone who knows a lot more about this than I do. But we get to stand on the shoulders of our parents, and they're standing on the shoulders of their parents. And yes, there was trauma passed, absolutely, between these generations. But yet here we are. We're living in a world where we're more compassionate to gay people. We're more compassionate to trans people. There's more compassion between the genders. Like, these things that used to divide us, these issues those barriers have been dissolved or are being dissolved. Obviously, there's still work to go in all these areas, but when you pull back, and again, I can't stress enough the need is the wrong word. If you can pull back, if you can stop staring with your nose tight at the window and just pull back to try to get the bigger picture and see the whole thing as a whole rather than this tiny little part. If you can step away and take in that bigger picture, it really is beautiful. And yes, when you come in and zero in, there's still some dark places and trauma still being worked out. But on the whole, we're moving forward and we're coming together, and the things that kept us apart 100 years ago aren't keeping us apart anymore. And that's fantastic. And so now the big challenge of our generation, the people my age, 40s, 50s, 30s, is we get to be the generation that says, no more. I'm not going to pass the trauma that was given to me onto my kids or keep perpetuated into my society. So I'm going to pull this out. This book, Prisoners of Hate. This is a fantastic book. This written by a psychologist. As part of my spiritual awakening and my spiritual journey, I read a lot of books. For me, the space between good psychology and spirituality is just a big gray ocean. Like, not quite sure where one ends and the other begins. I feel like they really go hand in hand. This one is not overtly a spiritual book, but for me, this was a huge piece of my understanding of the spirit of humanity and this idea of intergenerational trauma. In the Bible, the word is, I believe the expression is the sins of the father, passed on to their children. Prisoners of Hate deals with all of that, and it can't recommend this book high enough. Anyway, this idea that a traumatized person, they're acting this way because of their own trauma. No one's choosing to be a bad guy. No one's choosing to hold so much anxiety and fear. That's not something that's comfortable. It's not something that a lot of people consciously want, but subconsciously it's being held. And it gets perpetuated. And so you take that trauma and you put it on another person, another group of people. And this is at all levels. This is, the interpersonal levels, like our romantic relationships, our intimate-partner relationships. This is our familial relationships. This is our relationships with neighbors. This is a relationship with, different parts of our country. And then at the macro level, like, region to region, tribe to tribe. Like, this is same dynamic at all those levels. So when I look at what's happening in the Middle East, and I just see a very traumatized population that hasn't transmuted, hasn't worked through their trauma, and so they're pushing it out and putting it on someone else. So yeah, so this is. We need to stop talking. There's no directives here, but if we can shift the lens from, oh, how ironic that the people who were genocided are now genociding, let's elevate the conversation. Let's start talking about, oh, look at how these traumatized people are traumatizing another one, and how do we stop that? What are the steps for resolving trauma? That's actually pretty simple. It's not easy, but getting in touch with our emotions and feeling the pain. Well, this is the other thing. This idea of anger, and when you have anger for another person or something like that, anger is almost always a secondary emotion. If you can get a bit underneath that anger and see that anger is coming from a place of grief generally, or sadness, fear of abandonment. That's so if we can start looking past people's anger and not let it trigger our own anger, if there's any left inside of you, but rather start seeing where this is actually coming from, and this is from a place of deep hurt and deep pain. And so it's so much easier to be compassionate when we can see the world from that viewpoint, through that framing. And then it allows us to then become more compassionate with ourselves, so that when we have feelings of anger, rather than being, getting angry at ourselves or feeling that way, we can go, okay, where is this coming from? Where is the hurt that this is actually stemming from? And then letting ourselves feel that pain, like letting ourselves really get in touch with it. And that doesn't necessarily mean knowing where it came from or having to put together your history, whatever. I mean, for some people that's what's necessary, but it isn't always necessary. Sometimes it's just feeling that pain and letting it run through you, letting yourself cry, letting yourself really let it out. And then what I've found is that when you get to the bottom of that deep sea of grief, which I had been carrying, I had my sea of grief. I didn't know I was carrying around with me, but when I found it, wow. Okay. All right, not sure what's going on there, but we will edit that out. Yeah. So, yeah, this book, I found one of my notes in here, which, again, biblical reference. When we're thinking about trauma, and when people are acting out of trauma, acting that if we can get to the place of forgiveness, forgive them. They know not what they're doing. Like they really, and this is to not, again, people are responsible for their actions, for sure. This is not an argument for not holding people accountable. But I believe where we're heading is a place where we can hold people accountable, but also not give away our peace in the process. And by that, I mean, we don't have to get angry at them. We don't have to be traumatized by their actions. We can hold them accountable, whatever that looks like. Obviously, getting them to, someone to stop hurting others, and whatever means are necessary to do that, but not in a way that's going to take away our peace, not in a way that is going to, if we can not be emotionally charged in the process of holding people accountable, then that's going to elevate our consciousness. That's going to bring us as a society as a whole. And this again happens at the individual basis, individual level. So as each individual gets to a place where they've cleared out their trauma, gotten to a place where they can see others people's trauma and see where it's coming from and not be triggered by it, but instead feel compassion for them. Then when it comes time for finding justice in this world, rather than perpetuating more trauma by wanting to punish and harm the people who have been aggressive towards one another, we can use the means necessary to stop them from hurting others, but not in a way that is about, it's not about being punitive. It's not about hurting them. It's about just the practical need to stop the harm from continuing. So yes, forgive them. They know not what they're doing. And love holds no grievances. 2 notes that I took while reading this book. You can see I've got lots of notes. It's things marked up. This was a really good one. I highly, highly, highly recommend. If you want to get a better understanding of where your own traumas might be coming from, or not, or how they show up in your life, and the blocks that can create to your own growth, and then taking that up to all to the levels, to the macro level, where we can see as a collective, a group of traumatized people collectively traumatizing another collective group of people. So yeah, let's elevate this conversation. Let's bring it to the next level so that we can all become more compassionate, more loving together, and create a place, get us to that next level. It's already happening. This is why I'm most excited too. It's like, it doesn't matter what I say or if people watch these videos or not. One of the reasons I'm so excited about the future of humanity is because it's not that I have this vision of the world and I don't, and I'm just hopeful for the someday when it comes. I see it happening now. It's already happening. I went to a piece of theater yesterday about the Polytechnique shooting here that happened in 1989 here in Montreal, and it was beautiful. It was really beautiful. It was one of the first. I don't know the full history of it. Again, I'm not a history person, obviously, but it was one of the first mass shootings, and certainly the big one here in Quebec. I mean, it was even in the play yesterday. It was referred to as the Quebec's 9/11. It happened December 6th, 1989, and it was a big deal. And it wasn't just a shooting. The shooter was driven by his hatred of women, and all the victims were women. And in his letter, he referenced his hatred of feminism, which actually I've got a whole idea in my head going about that feminism and how important that was towards that bringing balance to the genders, and how bringing that balance to the genders is allowing all of us to evolve in consciousness, and how that was a big piece but anyway, I'm getting off track, but someday, maybe next week or two, or maybe early next year, I'm looking forward to getting my thoughts in order on that topic. It was super exciting when I started seeing it that way. Anyway, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like it's either like a very profound idea. It's like, oh, wow. Or it's like incredibly mundane. It's just like, well, duh, obviously. So it's like, I'm not quite sure what, but I'm going to put it in a video, and who knows, maybe other people will find it as interesting as I do. Anyway, all that to say is, spoiler alert, the big message is, it wasn't, so it starts with Polytechnique, and then they talk about, and then it's a two and a half hour long play. So, and they talk about other mass shootings and this whole story. It's more of like a what they call it, docu theater. It was really good. Highly, highly recommend. But the end message was forgiveness, which, my heart just got so excited. Like this idea of we can go around and we can carry anger or about what happened. And that's important. Like, I don't want to discount the power of anger. Anger is incredibly crucial, but that's not a place we want to live, right? That's not a place where, for example, anger is what I needed to finally get out of an abusive marriage. Anger is what I needed to finally, this is a better way of phrasing it actually. Anger is what I needed to finally start standing up for myself. So I don't want to take anger. I don't want there to be any shame about the idea of anger, because anger exists for a reason, and it's very, very powerful, and it's so necessary for our spiritual growth. If I wasn't getting angry about my situation, I'd still be stuck there. So anger is the jet fuel that propels us forward. But once we're out of that space, once we're in a place where we're safer or we've made changes, that anger has served us, but hopefully we can all get to a place where we can recognize, oh, okay, I don't need to be angry anymore. Like we can let that go, and then we can get, again, it's anger is a secondary emotion. So where was the source of that? I know for me, in that example I gave, the source was the abuse I was experiencing in that marriage. But then once I was out of that living situation And with some time and for things to calm down, I could start to recognize my role in that, and why how I got in that position in the first place, and take some accountability for that. And again, like, not victim blaming, but everyone taking accountability for their own actions. And that the act of starting to take some ownership made it much easier to not be angry anymore. So that it can't just be, oh, I'm not angry anymore, and like you just pretend you're not angry anymore. I mean, we're not going to spiritually bypass this. That anger ends when we start taking accountability. We start dealing with the primary source. That, again, it's like anger is secondary. So let's get to the primary source. So yeah, that's man, I should call this ramblings. Which is fine. I don't mind. I'm a rambler. It's nice to get this stuff out. It's nice to I'm getting more comfortable talking to the camera. I'm not sure where I was going with that, but I think the idea is clear. Like, things are moving forward. We are becoming more compassionate. We're becoming more loving. More and more of us have recognized the abuse, how abusive it is to take these feelings that are inside of us and blame others for them. And instead, we're taking accountability, and we're getting down to the source. We're feeling those feelings. We're crying. We're expressing our grief. We're going to therapy. We're working with coaches. We're improving our diet. We're exercising. We're getting in touch with our body. We're moving our bodies. This again, our trauma is stored on our bodies. So a big part of my healing was really massage therapy, working out, letting myself cry, plant medicine. Like, these are all, we live in a time with all these modalities and free coaching online, like amazing coaches on YouTube that saved my life. These are, we live in incredible times. And so I'm so optimistic. I see the conversation around what's happening in the Middle East is amazing. For the first time in my lifetime, where the conversation is shifted in a way that wasn't an accident. There's a lot of people who have stood up in defense of the Palestinian cause and sacrificed for it. Lost jobs, weren't hired, pushed out of polite society. Like, those people did amazing work, but they held, and a lot of that, I think, driven by anger, which is, again, the beauty of anger. Like, to be so angry about what you're seeing and wanting it to change. Like, that's such an important part of becoming whole. Yeah. So, but we're moving. A lot of people are now moving out of that anger to finding the more compassionate place, finding compassion for others around them, finding compassion for themselves, and it's a beautiful thing to see. All right, just wanted to put that out there. Who knows if anyone will ever see this, and that's totally fine too. But things are great. Things are wonderful. I'm going to see my family next week. My cat is in good health despite being an old man, but I love him so much. Bye, y'all.